Jet Lawrence and Hayden Deegan joined the ranks, now 3 winners in 3 rounds in both classes. We'll preview the weekend, which includes the first Triple Crown race.
Hayden Deegan, Anaheim 2. Deegan wins. And he is right in it all. Checkered flag is out. Jet Lawrence back on top. Supercross.
Yeah, SMX Insider is back, headed to round 4 of the SMX World Championship and Monster Energy AMA Supercross this Saturday, Glendale, Arizona. We're the Jasons, Wygant, and Thomas. It took 3 rounds for things to look like, I think many people thought it would look like at the first round. We now have Jet Lawrence and Hayden Deegan in the winners column. Is that surprising? Is it not surprising? I don't know how you score this situation now, JT.
Well, I think this is what everyone expected coming into the season. The defending champion, SuperMotocross, he's 2 for 2 in a 31-round series. And then Hayden Deegan seemed like he was the heavy favorite coming into this West Coast region. It has not played out that way. But for everybody that was expecting a certain thing to happen going into Anaheim 1 a little over 2 weeks ago, you got that result at Anaheim 2. Now, the question is, where do we go from here? Is that going to be the norm moving forward? Or was it just an anomaly amongst a very random set of results?
Well, real quick, I'll throw it back to you. Jet won, but it wasn't dominant by any means. It was a dogfight the whole time. Was that a byproduct of the track? Or is it a byproduct of, yes, he won, but he's not several steps ahead of everyone, at least not yet?
Well, I would ask you this, Weege. If this was a year ago and Jet Lawrence went about it this exact same way, where he was patient, he made sure that he didn't upset let's face it, a Jason Anderson that's looking for a reason to get aggressive, and then he passed him, and then he pulled out a 3-second lead, and he managed it all the way to the finish. If we didn't see the first 2 rounds of 2025, would you say that this was anything out of the norm for the Jet Lawrence strategy?
Scary thought for everyone else. Right. That is in many ways the way he's won before. And that's probably not what people want to hear if you're one of his competitors, that he's doing this year what he's done in the past. We'll talk about Deegan and Lawrence and the new point leader, Ken Roczen, more as this show goes on. We do want to mention a shakeup earlier in the day. Jorge Prado, this is exactly what everyone did not want to see happen, specifically a Supercross unique to it obstacle knocking him out.
It's unfortunate, and let's hope for the best. But as you said, this is the one thing he couldn't do. When Monster Energy Kawasaki says to him, we really don't care what the result is, just stay out there, get the laps, get the repetition, and learn so you can continue to be better, and also so you're your best self this coming May. The only thing you can't do is crash and have a legitimate injury, and we don't know the extent of quite yet. So a huge misstep here. I'm sure in the moment, he's probably kicking himself, but let's just hope that it's the lesser of what it could possibly be.
And we're speaking on Jorge Prado, so let's get to our SMX medical update and bring on Dr. Joe McGinley. So Jorge, super forthcoming, did an interview right after he was hurt, saying he dislocated his shoulder. So with that information, what runs through your mind when you hear that?
Yeah, these guys are amazing. He's out there on the track, gets injured, and then still takes the time to update the fans. I mean, how much more access and better does that get? It's unfortunate. We talked about it a little bit with the Achilles, that, he was sort of off rhythm coming up to that turn, and he reached out to grab the net to catch himself, and his shoulder popped out. I'm sure he wasn't expecting that type of force, and that's a lot of time where these injuries occur, is when you're not expecting it. Good news is he mentioned it popped right back in within, 30 seconds of that popping out. That's a great sign. And the fact that he was doing an interview, right after the injury, also a great sign. So it was good to see all that right after this type of injury.
Yeah, so if it goes back in, how bad is it going forward, or is that actually hard to know that quickly?
Yeah, he mentioned he's getting an MRI. That's exactly what he needs to determine the extent of that injury. The fact that it popped back in quickly and, he was in relatively not in discomfort during that interview means there's probably minimal damage, but you really won't know to the MRI. Structures that can get damaged, there's ligaments down the lower part of the joint. This is the ball and socket joint of the shoulder. Also, you can tear your labrum. Rarely you can damage nerves, you can damage muscle. It didn't seem like he was in distress during that interview, so also unlikely. But the MRI is going to be the definitive telltale as far as what's happening in that shoulder.
And is the risk here the chance of, it's back in, but the chance of re-injuring it, having it come back out, is that what you're trying to keep an eye on at this point?
A lot of times for our athletes that come to see us, we'll treat with platelet-rich plasma or PRP. That helps to accelerate that healing process. More long-term, you want to strengthen the muscles around the shoulder to keep that shoulder stable. Once you have a shoulder dislocation, you are prone to it in the future. That's one of the risk factors for future dislocation is a prior dislocation.
30-second board, hot topics in the sport. Now, the Troy Lee Designs race team made a splash at Anaheim 1, announcing they will be part of Ducati's upcoming factory race operation. Probably see that on the racetrack in 2026, but they're still coming to the races with a display bike. And then while they're there, they've put together a helmet collection, and not just of Troy Lee Designs riders, but all the top athletes in the pits. And they're going to use the helmets to create a fund and then donate that to the Red Cross for wildfire relief out there in Southern California. Here's Troy Lee himself with more on that.
Oh, we're just trying to take care of some of the people that have been involved in these really nasty fires, man. And just saying if we can get the top 10 helmets from the 250 and 450, I think we can bring some money. And that's what it's all about, just reaching out. And we sent them all gear bags to the people up there in LA last week. And then when I talked to Dave Prater, he said, I think it's a good idea. Let's see if we can pull this together. So my team's pulling it all together.
Yeah, that's a really great cause. And those people need all of the help they can get. And Troy really stepping up to help a great cause. Now, speaking of the racing, and a little bit less of a good feeling that we had, the rivalry between Hayden Deegan and Julian Beaumer is finally arrived. And we knew this was coming. You knew Hayden Deegan was going to find his form. And I've been so curious as to how Juju Beaumer would handle this, because Hayden wants to get in there and scrap it out and get the war of words going.
Yeah, you pissed off the bull last week. Juju ran his mouth, so it's time to lock in. And you don't want to piss me off because I come out swinging.
And to Juju's credit, he has done such a great job of avoiding all that.
Yeah, qualifying was good this morning, and we got together in that heat race, and I went down as nothing too big, nothing to worry about, and got docked as well. So that didn't help my case, but got off to a good start, and he rode great. Hats off to him. He was a better man tonight, and we're going to get back to work.
You just said, you know what? Go ahead. You've been fantastic. You had a great night in Anaheim too, and it's going to be so much fun to watch how that plays out, where I think Hayden wants to antagonize Juju, and I think Juju is like, not going to play those games.
Okay, let's transition to the 450 class. Going back to Anaheim 2, gate picks are usually pretty obvious to figure out, but it rained during the 250 race and before the 450 main. So tell us how that impacted the proceedings.
Well, Hayden Deegan chose the gate on the outside, but right up against the tunnel. And it was a perfectly straight gate. And also remember how much room it gave him to his left. Once he clears that tunnel, he can start moving left, has really no impediment to get to that first corner. Well, Eli Tomac followed that gate pick. He saw how well it worked. Everything was perfect. But when it started raining, that particular rut that Tomac and Deegan had chosen was down to the base. It was really, really hard packed. When you add water to that, it becomes very, very slippery. And there's a great picture. You can go to Racetrack's online Instagram and see it. Chris Kiefer actually took it, but it shows how much wheel spin that Eli Tomac got. And he swung wildly to the left once he cleared that. And Tomac said as much after the race, that he thought he chose the right gate. It ended up being far too slippery to get a good drive. And in the end, if you wanted to look, why did Eli Tomac get a poor result? You don't need to look much further than that exact gate as to why it didn't go very well at A2 for Eli Tomac.
That's going to make Glendale pivotal for Tomac, who you might argue maybe he has been the best rider in the series over these 3 rounds, but he's tied with Lawrence in points, tied for third. That hurts. So he's got to get some back this weekend. Now back to the 250 class. Kind of lucked out. We had teased this before the main event, how it looked like perhaps a podium sweep with teenagers was en route, and then that's exactly what happened, because the veteran Jordan Smith crashing late in the race opened the door for Cole Davies to get his first podium and join fellow teenagers Deegan and Beaumer on the box. So pretty wild that this has worked out. This used to be normal, JT, but in this case it had not happened since 2011.
Yeah, I think we have to give a shout out to that SMX Next program. These kids are being developed early, and when they arrive to the SuperMotocross World Championship stage, they seem more prepared. I don't believe that that's a coincidence that we haven't had that since 2011. These kids are ready. You look at Cole Davies, the improvement he made in a year. Julian Beaumer, 1 year prior, graduate of that. And we all forget about Hayden Deegan, was a graduate of this program also. And all these kids are ready to battle the veterans. So it's an interesting time. I think as we move east, maybe we'll get some more of the older, old guard show up and start winning some races. But for this West Coast, it seems like the youth have gone wild a little bit.
And speaking of the youth movement in 250 Supercross, we're going to have our big interview here with Davi Millsaps, who is working as a coach and trainer for Julian Beaumer right now. But Davi, I first want to mention, I think you were 18 when you won a 250 Supercross title back in 06. So you've seen it on both sides. As far as Juju is concerned, just take us back. What was his program like, say 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago when you hooked up with him? This has been a very steep climb for him. What was it like back then when you first started?
Honestly, it was just over 2 years ago when he hired me, and he can maybe do 3 laps, honestly, fast laps, maybe between, I would give him 2 to 3 laps at max before he was shot. His first day that he hired me, I'm like, hey, what is your normal riding day like? So I have an understanding of what I'm in for. And he's like, oh, I do, 30, 40 laps, something like that. And I'm like, okay, cool. We'll start small. I had him do 30 laps and he couldn't barely move the next day. So I'm like, so that's not very much true on your part. But and we only did, small laps. I didn't have him do, big motos or anything like that, because it was just, I'm trying to see what he's doing. He had a race in 3 weeks at Anaheim too. So I'm trying to get some speed back in him and some consistency with that. But after that, it's he gave me 100%, and 2 years goes by and here we are.
So right now, obviously running the red plate, we're focused on how's he going to do this weekend at Glendale? Can he win the title this year? Is that necessarily where your focus is, or even his team's focus is? Or are you guys thinking, no, we're really just getting started here. Don't judge everything on 2025.
Obviously we want to win the title. That's everyone's goal, is to win the title. But I also feel like it's taking it week for week and seeing what we're learning from, week in and week out. He hasn't really got a podium. He didn't really get a podium last year. Charlotte was SMX, and then he comes out and he has a 2-1-2. That's huge for him. It's building his confidence. But yeah, still trying to keep him humble and keep him grounded. But I feel like the Glendale obviously being a hometown race for him, and then the rest of the season being East Coast and East West shootouts. I think he's just looking forward to the learning and having fun with it and seeing where it takes him. I personally would love to win a championship but I also feel like let's take it race by race. This is your second year racing Supercross, your second year being a pro. You're 18 years old. You don't have a lot of experience at all. Yeah, he has me in his corner with a lot of experience, but yet I'm not the one that's lining up on the gate. He is. So when that gate drops, what I tell him, go in here, just go whoop, out one side. So, so it's, I think it's just trying to keep everything and, tight knit and keep pushing and grinding, and where we end up at Salt Lake is where we end up, and we move forward to the next year, no matter what it is.
My last thing, people are really enjoying this back and forth now that we've seen with Deegan on the podium and then back and forth on social. Is this really a thing? Is this a thing that you guys are talking about, addressing, acknowledging? How are we going to deal with this? Or you guys just do your own thing? How important is that actually? Because on the outside, it looks like pure fire.
I mean, the thing is I don't know. I don't know what Hayden feels. I don't know what Brian's telling him or who's telling him. I know what Julian feels, and I know Julian's having fun with it. I think it's good for the sport. I think it's something that people love and are eating into. But I just love the fact that you have both the guys that will, talk mad crap to each other, but then when they're at the races, at the end of the race last weekend, high five or shook hands, whatever it was. They've been racing each other since they were 6 years old, and I think that's where the whole confusion was he said, I've been dealing with his antics. Well, yeah, because he does talk that way. He does talk mad crap. He does. That's just who he is, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the build up between both of them is I think it's funny. I think it's great. I think they're both feeding off of it. I think that's something that this 250 class needs. You know, it came in where it was Levi and Hayden. Now it's Julian and Hayden, and then you have, you know, Jordan Smith lurking right there. I think it's something great. I don't mind it at all. I think that he's having fun with it, and I would love to see where the year takes it.
Okay, now let's go back to both classes as a whole, whether they be young riders or older riders. This is pretty neat. 3 different winners in 3 races in both classes, JT. So I don't know. We're going to go 4 deep as we go to Glendale?
Well, this is where we come in with the hashtag deep field conversation. But this is what we all were hoping for when you do all these preview shows and you talk about the season and you're daydreaming about what could be. We're getting all of that. The best riders, both young and old, are bringing their best stuff to the series in both classes. So what more do you really want? And I've said this for years, all you can really ask for is when the gate drops to not know who's going to win. And that is exactly what we've gotten this season.
If you want 4 different 450 winners to start the season, can you give me some names of who can be a 4th this weekend?
Yeah, I want to say Cooper Webb. I just don't think this track sets up well for him. Statistically, it's his worst racetrack on the schedule. It's a little bit too fast for what he does well. So yeah, I think a guy like Jason Anderson, I think a guy like Ken Roczen, both of them are on form. They've been on the podium already, and they're both historically very good at this particular racetrack, this type of dirt. And I think the Triple Crown will work for them as well because they're very good in shorter races. So those would be my 2. You take your pick as to who shows up and gets the win, but those are the dark horse winners for Glendale for me.
Yes, if you're a Ken Roczen fan and you're already pumped that he has the point lead, more good news could be en route because he's very good in this building, and we'll get to that with Clinton Fowler and our SMX facts later. But let's talk about what he's done so far. The beginning of the year, you often see oddball winners, oddball point leaders, because you're dealing with a short sample size, which can really swing the math in a variety of ways. But he has done something in these first 3 rounds that to me is very impressive. We know Roczen's great early in the races, but when he's bad, it shows late in the race. And all 3 rounds this year, JT, that hasn't happened. He has been just as good at the late laps as he's been in the beginning all year long. That's the real good news, I think, for a Roczen fan.
Yeah, there's really been nothing to criticize so far, but the questions will remain. Can he have the same form that he has in January? Can he maintain that March, April, and May? And for the last 7 years, it's been no. And that's the tough part. That's going to be the thing that he has to address when the time comes. There's nothing he can do about that right now other than show up and execute, which he's been doing. But that's still going to be the theme. When we get late in the series, we swing back west and the championship's on the line, what does that version of Ken Roczen look like? And we will have this conversation again on this very show, and we'll have more data to support it. But I think everybody is looking at the same thing, is this Kenny going to be that Kenny when it counts?
Now back to the 250 class. One interesting thing is that this will be the last West race for a couple of weeks, only 4 rounds, and then East will begin at the 5th race in Tampa. Normally West race is longer, but they also get a longer break after they race a bunch of rounds. So there's only a few weekends off, and they'll be back at Arlington. So specifically, for example, Joe Shimoda, he's been fighting through injury valiantly, but how much relief is he going to get? And also talk about Shimoda in a Triple Crown.
Yeah, I think for Shimoda, this couldn't come at a better time unless it already happened. He really just needs time off the motorcycle. We'll see if he has any sort of surgical procedure during the break, but rest and recovery, that's the name of the game for Joe Shimoda, getting back to where he can ride aggressively. But I'll give you 2 other names that it's a very important round for, and that's Julian Beaumer and Hayden Deegan. The sentiment leaving Glendale, who's looking over at who thinking I've got the upper hand, is going to be very, very important, because I think if Deegan goes out and wins again, it's only going to cement what he thought he already knew, is that I'm the guy, I'm supposed to be winning, and this is the way it's going to go when we come back to racing. But if Beaumer goes out at what you would say is his home race, he's from Lake Havasu, and sends a message back to Hayden Deegan, they're like, yeah, you had a great race, but I'm still the points leader for a reason. I've been the best guy through 4 races, and I just showed you again at a Triple Crown. That's a huge thing that Hayden Deegan's going to have to stew on for the next few weeks. So Again, we started off the show talking about that race within a race between these two. This is going to be a very critical juncture in the mind games that go on over the next month before we see them again.
And what makes it even more fun is the Triple Crown format. First time we've seen it in 2025. We'll show you exactly how it works. It's 3 shorter races for each class. And that's what's going to be the key. Having to nail 3 starts and be consistent throughout the night. So Triple Crown Racing, and by the way, Deegan has been inconsistent with starts this year, as an example. So have many of the 450 riders. What are you thinking about when you hear Triple Crown with the dynamic that we've already set up?
Well, you know, it is a different type of race. If your starts haven't been exactly where you want, it puts more pressure on you. And quite frankly, Beaumer's nailed it every single time, and Deegan's been all over the map with his start. So I think it puts a little bit more pressure on Hayden to get those starts perfectly right. But I think, you know, when you think about the 450 class as well, you get a little bit more of the average. You don't have to go out and put all this pressure on one particular event. As long as you're there every single time, your odds of doing well ramp dramatically. And I'll give you an example. Last year, Cooper Webb wins Anaheim 2 Triple Crown with a 2.25 score. That's almost never going to get you a win in any type of competition, but that's what the Triple Crown events bring. There's a lot of chaos, variance, and if you're there every time, you might end up at the top, but no matter what, you're going to end up with a strong points haul leaving Glendale.
Triple Crown's been around a few years now, and here's something we've learned. It's about consistency, but also not. One of the interesting things at the end of the night, if you crash out of a normal Supercross main event, you're going to finish last, next to last, and take a huge hit in points. We've seen multiple times where a rider has 2 decent finishes, crashes out of a race, and still gets 8th overall or 9th overall, and the amount of damage is essentially cut in half. So that's something else to watch this weekend. A lot of times the Triple Crown has ended and you look and you're like, how did he get 7th? Well, a 2-3-20 can get it done. So there's a lot of different math to think about, and how will that affect sports betting with NXT Bets? Let's bring in the experts.
Alrighty, James. We're 3 rounds in. We got 3 different winners. Absolutely amazing so far. Ken Roczen holding the red plate. But man, it was Jet Lawrence last week at Anaheim too. What'd you see out of Jet before we dive into the odds?
Well, I saw a champion, really. I saw a rider that was still struggling with his motorcycle, still having the same issues, but figured out how to race and win that race. I felt like Jason Anderson and even Ken Roczen at some point had him somewhat covered, but as he's number 1, he's got the big old red plate, or number 1 plate. He figured out how to do it. So coming in this weekend at Glendale, we know Eli Tomac is still beast mode. We know how this track is always going to be a layout, but the way I'm looking at the track, I think because it seems like it's going to be a little bit faster, might kind of mask some of those issues that Jet has. And coming off a win, he knows he has some momentum, but he still doesn't have that momentum. I expect him to obviously come out here firing and probably try to get another W.
Well, James, they got him as the favorite in the odds. He's at a 120 now. Now, remember, guys, you got to go check the latest on nxtbets.com for the latest bets. But, James, they've got him as the favorite, a 120 odds. Eli's the 300 odds. The thing, you look at the numbers behind here, man, Jet Lawrence has struggled in Triple Crowns. Last year, the 3 different events where we did Triple Crown races, he got 6th, 1st, and 8th. That first, he swept in Indianapolis. That was amazing. But in Anaheim 2, he crashed in the 1st and the 3rd race. And in St. Louis, in that 3rd one, how can we forget? Justin Barcia kind of T-boned him, I think inadvertently, but he has struggled in these races. But James, man, the entire opposite. You mentioned that track. Eli Tomac, Glendale, he's got 5 wins there. He's won 8 of 17 Triple Crowns in the history. Can you bet against Eli Tomac on this track in Glendale, James?
Well, yeah, you can, because now Jet Lawrence is in the field, and I even, you throw in Chase Sexton, and you throw in a guy like Ken Roczen, who's pretty good at these things as well, and probably riding maybe the best he has in his whole career. So Eli, I mean, to me, it is a pick-em between him and Jet, just because Eli, the success he's had over these Triple Crowns. But I think Jet's struggle is more about starts rather than actually the way he rides. Like you said, what happened last year with Barcia, and in these Triple Crown formats, it's really about the start. So Yamaha has got it figured out. When Eli needs to get a start, he gets one, and so that's why he's been so successful. So as good as Jet it's been rotting. Obviously, he is your defending champion. A bad start would put him out in these Triple Crowns, and that's why they're so excited to go.
James, let's talk about starts. Ken Roczen's our best start, actually second best starter this year behind Hunter Lords, but he's been amazing on the starts. The odds for Ken Roczen, our red plate holder, is 1,100 right now. Here's the red plate holder at an 1,100. He won here last year in a normal format race. He won here in 2020, sweeping a Triple Crown. It's arguably his best venue. On 1,100 odds, it feels like that's a really solid, good value pick.
The disrespect they got him for. But, you know, I think it really just comes down to is it's hard to put your odds in. And when you watch Ken Rod, if you just take away the past history and you just look at this year, I mean, Ken's been good. Obviously, he's got the red plate, so he's been really good, the best of everybody. But I think it's just you're not used to that. And what I see from Ken is not the guy that was starting out front. Like when he won last year, he was out front, he was gone, race was over. He's been coming up to the pack and putting himself up. And so to me, I don't even know if Ken Roczen believes that he's like the red plate holder. So, you know, the odds that he has, I think history would say it is a good value, but you know, the disrespect they've given him, I think Ken's a solid pick this weekend as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, we got some amazing choices this week. Red plate holder with some low odds, the clear favorites, Jet and Eli Tomac. Be sure to check out nxtbets.com as those things may change as we go in. James, looking forward to Glendale.
Same here.
And from NXT Bets, we go to SMX Next, which is the program a lot of fans knew as SX Futures. Now, the whole SMX Next program encompassing both what we called Futures races in Supercross and what we called the Moto Combine races in Pro Motocross. We got a bunch of those races coming up throughout the calendar year, and Glendale is the first. One thing I want to remind everyone of, this is not a points-paying championship. The national title in the Supercross side is handed out just with the results at the Pittsburgh round coming up in April. And then the 3 Pro Motocross races, those are standalone. The idea here really is to build experience for the riders more than putting an emphasis on gathering points or getting results. JT, you already said it. We're seeing all that experience pay off for riders like Deegan and Beaumer and Cole Davies who have come through this program before. I'm going to run down a couple of names to watch for this weekend. Caden Dudney, who is now part of the Monster Energy Yamaha Star Racing team. Watch him. Landon Gordon, Landon Gibson, don't confuse them, they're both fast. Caden Manier, who has now moved also to Star Racing Yamaha. Liam Aloff, Luke Fauser. Those are the names we think will be good, but we didn't have Juju on the radar 2 years ago, and he quickly got on it, so we don't know exactly what to expect.
Yeah, and I think for myself, I'm going to have to really pay attention to these riders and think about their pro career outside of this SMX Next event, because if we've learned anything, we've learned that these kids are pretty close to ready to make the jump. You look at the 250 West class, it's filled with graduates from the last couple of years. So I'm going to be kind of seeing who's ready to take that step. I think maybe it's Manier and Dudney. Those kids have really shown a lot of promise when they've been on this stage before and at other amateur national events. But it's getting fun to watch these kids develop, because I always thought they were further away than they are. The Deegans and the Davies and the Beaumers have really kind of changed the narrative for what these SMX Next events mean.
And what's changed the narrative for this weekend is that Drew Adams would have been the favorite, but he got the call up. Monster Pro Circuit Kawasaki lost so many riders, he ended up racing well at Anaheim too, so he'll be racing again in the 250 class at Glendale, maybe opening the door up for some of these other riders to become the next Cole Davies, the next Drew Adams. And this is the track that they will be battling on. Hey, JT, I always say the riders say we like long rhythms and 180 turns. Look at this racetrack.
Yeah, it's always one of the fastest layouts of the season because you see how big the floor is. So that gives them more room to work with. And then when you correlate that to the results, what does Eli Tomac do well? Really high-speed racetracks where he can use his skill set. You think about a track like Charlotte last year, very similar type layout, really fast, lots of straight line stuff. So watch for Tomac to do really well. The other note I'll make here is that whoop section, there's a lot of speed that's going to be gained coming into those. So the riders that like to blitz whoops with a lot of speed are going to excel in those sections. Think Ken Roczen, think Chase Sexton, think Jet Lawrence. Those guys all love to grab a gear and let it rip coming into those whoops, where a guy like Cooper Webb, it doesn't work as well for him. Justin Cooper doesn't work as well. They want to find a rhythm through there, and entry speed is not their thing. So those little subtleties that can show up in the results are something to watch for this weekend.
And as promised, more data on Ken Roczen's rocketing to the top of the charts in Monster Energy AMA Supercross SMX Facts with Clinton Fowler. You had an eye-popping stat regarding Roczen and the red plate here.
Yeah, pretty cool. He's been the series leader in 8 different seasons. With this last weekend at A2 taking over that red plate, he ties Jeremy McGrath for the most seasons having that red plate on his bike in the history of Supercross, which is pretty cool. Obviously, Jeremy McGrath had a few titles more, but still, it just shows how good Ken Roczen has been for how long he has been. And obviously, a bunch of those are first and second round where he led the series because he has won 4 A1 openers. But he's had 2020, 2021. He went up against Cooper Webb and Eli Tomac. He went deep into the series with the red plate all the way to round 9. So he's been in it late. But man, the one that really sticks out for me with Ken Roczen is 2017 and that devastating injury. He won the first 2 rounds. It seemed like that was his year.
Absolutely. That was the theme coming in. Then he dominates Anaheim 1, wins round 2. Seemed like it was going that direction, and then crashed. And I almost feel like we're never going to get Roczen healthy enough to see the 2017 Roczen again. Somewhat overshadowed your point of he's had many other great seasons. The COVID interruption, we left Daytona with Roczen and Tomac just about tied at the halfway mark. My point here is he has shown, yes, he's a good starter for the season, but there have been years where he's stayed in it right to the end.
Yep, he sure has. And we're going now, Weege, to a place where Glendale, one of his best places on the circuit, he's got to be super excited. The amazing part, he swept here in 2020. He took the Triple Crown. Last year, he won here over Jason Anderson. He's won 3 times. He's got 6 podiums in his 9 starts. He should be feeling good about this, Weege.
And maybe even further, there are some other challengers who don't necessarily excel at this track, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. You look at Cooper Webb. Here's a guy, 2-time champion, and you always think he's fighting for a podium. In his 7 starts here, Weege, he has never been on the podium. Like, it's just one of those interesting places. But then, Weege, on the other hand, you got a guy like Eli Tomac, who, similar to Ken Roczen, is probably just sitting back going, man, I can't wait to get there. It's virtually a home race for him, almost the same distance. So when we race in Denver, which everybody refers to as his home race, but man, at Triple Crowns, Eli Tomac has 17 individual race wins, nearly a third of the 51 times we've had those individual races. He's won 8 of the overalls. It's tough to bet against a guy that has that, and he's won 5 times in Glendale in the Phoenix area, which is second most to Daytona. So we've got guys like Webb that haven't won a lot, and we've got guys like Eli Tomac and Ken Roczen that have, Weege.
Yep. Okay. So Triple Crown and Glendale, not great for some. They are great for others. We'll see if that data plays out this weekend. Thanks, Clinton. Yes, heading to Glendale. Let's show you where and when you can watch everything broadcasting live on Peacock and the SMX Video Pass if you're outside the United States. Race Day Live begins at 2:30 Saturday afternoon. That's Eastern time. And racing begins at 8 Eastern Saturday night. JT, you really can't get a much better scenario than this. Chaos in the first 3 rounds, and then throw in a Triple Crown and a racetrack that holds a lot of promise. This is going to be good.
I don't know of a better setup I could really think of. We have the parity we want. We have unexpected results. We have this Triple Crown format that I think everybody but the riders is in love with. Glendale is historically just a fantastic round for viewing. What else can you ask for, Weege?
Yep. Can't get here early enough. Be sure to join us either in person there outside of Phoenix or watch us on Peacock or the SMX Video Pass. See you in Glendale. See if Ken Roczen can keep this red plate run going.